Hello, welcome to Culture Vultures. I'm Sandy Frye, your host. Our creative director is Nancy Cole, and this is a program that examines the arts and culture all around Tampa Bay. And we have a very interesting art exhibit at the University of South Florida Contemporary Art Museum. And we're glad to welcome the co-curator of this exhibition titled Making Sense.
I'm Megan Voller, co-curator of this exhibition and associate curator of education at the USF Contemporary Art Museum. Thanks for having me, Sandy.
Oh, I'm glad that you're here. I know that we can set up the exhibit by saying there are 4 women artists.
That's correct.
Some of whom have been at it for quite a few decades.
That's right.
And some are relatively new. 2 are from America and 2 aren't. So tell us about them.
Yes, one's Canadian. You had me there for a second. I was thinking.
Right. Oh,
yes,
Canada.
Exactly. It's a different country. I forget that sometimes.
Right.
So tell you about them. So the 2 artists who are of an older generation are Rochelle Feinstein and Donna Nelson. And they're, as you put it, very experienced and very influential painters. Rochelle teaches at Yale, where she's the head of their painting department and printmaking. And Donna teaches at Tyler School of Art, which is at Temple University in Philadelphia.
Right.
And I mention that because 2 of the 2 other artists, Eva Gorgieva, who's from Bulgaria originally, although she's lived in the US for a long time, her whole adult life, and Deborah Grant were both students of Donna Nelson in
really?
Philadelphia.
Wow.
So where they teach is relevant to the show in the sense that the show is really about those relationships in part. So.
I guess it is, but also they have very distinct approaches.
They do. We put them together as a kind of interesting study in comparison and contrasts. It's not that they have nothing in common or everything in common. It's that each has their own distinct style, and there are certain commonalities or common threads that we think viewers will enjoy sort of tracing and appreciating as they see the show. For example, approaches to abstraction. So Donna Nelson, for example, works in a mode that's largely abstract, although she's really interested in the appearance of what she calls figures, and that's an invented word that she made up, P-H-I-G-O-R-S. It sounds like the word figures, but really what she's talking about is something between the representation of a figure that you would see in a realistic painting and something abstract. So it's a kind of form that begins to have a presence in the painting as she paints. Now, something viewers will notice that she has in common with her student Eva Gorgieva is that Eva is also interested in working in a sort of space that's somewhere between abstraction and being purely abstract, if you will, and painting from the world and somehow representing something. So we have this enormous painting by Eva. It's actually a diptych in 2 pieces that sort of hug each other. And it's called Ghost of Water. And you can actually see through this incredibly chaotic abstraction of fragmented pieces that a river flows. And that's the LA River. It's near Eva's studio, and she was really inspired by its ongoing construction and sort of refurbishment, if you will, as she was making this painting. Right. So that's the kind of thing that you'll see as a point of distinction that's also a sort of a common thread, that they're interested in abstraction and have a unique approach to it.
Right. Rochelle has a number of words that depict kind of people, various and sundry statements.
Yes.
Right.
And her enigmas.
And right, and under them can be something that is totally at cross purposes with the statement above.
Sure.
And I found that very intriguing. She came back from, I think, Accra, Ghana, a couple of years ago, and people asked her, what is Africa like? And she got a little irritated because they obviously thought Africa was all subsumed in one country.
Right.
And today, if someone would say, what is Africa like? They probably would be a lot more specific because, ironically, we have a very, very dreadful disease, which doesn't seem to have a cure, which is spreading faster and over the ocean now.
Right.
And we're all involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it does seem very topical in this
It does.
particular moment, as
It
you're saying.
does. It's ironic.
I mean, it's tragic.
It is.
Really.
It
I
is.
hate for it to be topical, but people are, I think, more alert than they've been recently of the sort of the geographical diversity and cultural diversity of Africa and its complexity. Yeah. And I even heard, you know, about a month ago when Ebola started to sort of really ramp up and it became a kind of international phenomenon, increasingly international. I did even hear a conversation on NPR about the ways in which the complexity of Africa seemed to stump Americans.
Yes.
And sort of the idea of, you know, not being able to have a conversation with the average American about where Sierra Leone is, for example. They just don't have sort of like a reference point.
That's right.
So her body of work that's called How Was Africa is very much about that phenomenon. And Rochelle often paints in response to puzzling instances of language, expressions she hears in pop culture or mass media that seem to her to mean sort of simultaneously a whole bunch of different things to different people and nothing, because they mean so many different things. So as you were describing, these mysterious, puzzling instances of language becomes things that she paints in a kind of perverse effort to understand better.
That's right.
And so in 2012, she went on a 6-week residency to Accra, Ghana, and this was actually a residency that was partly funded by the U.S. State Department. Rochelle was intended to be a cultural ambassador in Accra. And so not in the way of most artist residencies to go there and sort of be sheltered and make her own work. You know, often artist residencies are sort of retreats, but instead she was not retreating, she was supposed to engage when she was over there. And she was very excited about going to Accra. She was fascinated with Ghana's history as the first African country to experience post-colonial self-governance after declaring its independence from Great Britain in 1957. And so she was very excited to sort of learn more about the state of being post-colonial and what that meant today, and sort of what it's meant over the past decades and where Accra is now. It's a huge city, by the way. It's a city of 2.7 million people, and it's, you know, very cosmopolitan and very much a world capital, but also there are ongoing issues of underdevelopment.
Sure.
And so something that she consulted with the artists who she was mentoring a lot was just access to resources, the problems that they had associated with finding a market for their work, and sort of how to work towards success as artists. So as you mentioned, when she came back to, you know, her community of living in New York and in the vicinity of Yale, she was very concerned that people asked her sort of offhandedly, so how was Africa? And after this started to happen a lot, she realized that it wasn't a sort of a meaningless coincidence. It was really representative of this way in which Africa is a kind of enigma for people.
A blur.
A blur.
Oh, interesting.
So she decided to make this whole body of work. And there were really 3 parts to it. She realized when she came back that the one Ghanaian object that she had brought back with her was a copy of the Daily Graphic, which is the most read newspaper, the newspaper that everyone in Accra reads. And so she decided that she was going to take that newspaper apart, literally, and make it into her own newspaper of her own experience there. So she does that in a series of drawings that we have in the exhibit. She sort of uses a method that combines drawing and collage and pieces together a newspaper that is representative of her commentary on articles that appear in the newspaper, her reflections on what it was like to be in Accra for 6 weeks, some historical ruminations on post-coloniality in Ghana, and sort of like a collaging in of little actual elements of her trip there, like the little stamps that activated her cell phone when she punched in the number, that kind of thing. So we have this suite of drawings, and she then made those drawings, reproduced them into an actual newspaper. That's the second element. And viewers can come and they can read that newspaper and they can take it with them. We have a takeaway newspaper rack. So that's fun too. You can take it home and spend more time with it.
Right.
And then she collaged, the final piece, the third piece, is a large-scale painting that she collaged the newspapers into against a backdrop of sort of expressionistic washes of color. And she fused this kind of abstract color wash painting, which is very indicative of like American 20th century painting, the kind that's now really a part of our canon of American abstraction. And then she combined it with this decoupage or cut and paste of the newspaper on top, because it reminded her of some of the work that she had seen Ghanaian artists doing with this sort of craft method of cutting and pasting and collaging. And so she wanted to fuse those two methods, this sort of almost like a cliched, quintessentially American method, and then the craft method that she saw in
I would think it would be a much more practical thing for the artists themselves, because they may not have the kinds of materials they would have preferred, but not having them began to be very much creative again.
I think that's exactly right.
It's interesting. That's very, very interesting. I think that when she probably graduated from college, she hit something that gave rise to a number of female artists deciding that they were being overlooked for no particularly good reason. And it was I think it was a MoMA exhibit, which was a kind of a biennale sort of thing, where only 2 women, I think, were represented. And that enraged a lot of women. And that's when the Guerrilla Girls, I think, rose. And Guerrilla Girls were women who were anonymous in their getting together and deciding how they can bring to public attention the fact that they were equally perhaps educated and successful, and somehow ignored by what was the male level of superiority, which they weren't very impressed with either. So it has done, I think, it's done its work. And it also included people who maybe are shut out of opportunities for which they may be suited and talented with. There is only one other woman, I think, who was born the same year, who is in the...
Donna Nelson.
Right, who may have the same feeling. But they all have done incredibly well in the kinds of scholarships that they have obviously gotten in various indications. And I think it was Rochelle who has worked with the Graphic Studio Research in the Arts.
Yes, that's right. Rochelle just worked with us this past year.
Right.
It's a very important issue that you bring up. And we actually asked this in an interview question that is included in our exhibition catalog, which hasn't been printed just yet. We're actually in the process of going to print with it. It'll be available for visitors in November to the museum. And we did an interview with each of the artists and then gathered that together in a kind of master interview. And one of the questions that we posed was, how does being a woman factor into your work? And across the board, the answer was, it's not a determining factor, but it certainly is a factor of significance. And Rochelle actually chose to answer this question, and I enjoyed her answer very much, but she chose to answer it in a kind of ironic way. She wrote me a very short fictional letter from someone who she calls young white woman. And she prefaced it by saying, my story is old. I've been dealing with this issue for so long. You don't want to hear from me. But here's a letter from someone else. And then she proceeded to write a little note from young white woman. And the note goes, you know, dear Megan, because I'm the interviewer. Dear Megan, I'm a 30, or actually I think it's a 20, I'm a 28-year-old young painter who has just graduated from Yale. You know, I was at the top of my class. I've received notable awards. My career is going well. I've had some sales. You know, it's not so much that I'm destined for instantaneous fame, but I can't complain. Yet at the same time, I noticed that while my career is sort of chugging along at a reasonable pace, the art world is absolutely obsessed with 5 or 6 young men who are about 5 years younger than I am. They've just come out of school, they haven't accomplished anything else, but the market is in love with them. And when you see things written about their work, it's not really about the content of the work, it's about how much their paintings are selling for. Is that really the way things still are? Sincerely, young white woman. And I think that kind of says it all, her tongue-in-cheek response. Right. This issue is still alive. And it's insidious and it's subtle, But there's nothing the art world loves more than a hot, I mean popular, a popular young man who has emerged as a dynamic new talent. It's a great story, and people love to see rising stars. And I think just not as many of them are necessarily women, or as you mentioned, people of color.
Yeah.
Increasingly, the art world is more inclusive.
Yes.
But we still have a long way to go. How about?
Oh, indeed. That's right. And I'm sure that they're still at work. Collecting political art or maybe politically oriented art in posters and what have you have become something that people do now, not only because they may be in confluence with what is being said through the artwork, but also because they have been aware now that the oddest things have proved to be saleable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a friend who collected he collected antiquities that he could afford. And they were some Roman and antiquities and so forth. And then he became interested in films, usually American films, that were set in old Rome.
Yes,
and
I
old
know
Greece.
who you mean.
Right. And he began to do movie posters.
Yeah.
He collected movie posters. And when one of the museums in England had a refurbishing and going to reopen again its new self, they asked him to bring his collection. And he not only brought his collection, he made a speech about all of these things. I thought it was wonderful. And I thought, who would have thought collecting movie posters would wind up in this? But it's very clever.
That's a testament to what he has done as a collector who it also sounds like has been acting as a curator. Like he turned his collection into something interesting that tells a story. And that's what we love at museums. Yeah. We like to tell stories about art with objects.
Absolutely, that's right. Well, now one of the women works with metal, and that's very nice. Now I think this is the woman from Bulgaria.
That's right.
Yes.
This is Eva Gorgieva.
Yeah.
So Eva is better known, as it were, currently at least, for her large-scale abstract paintings. And we were just talking about one, Ghost of Water. But something that we started to do with her at Graphic Studio is make metal sculptures. And I should preface this by saying at Graphic Studio, which is located on the USF Tampa campus, we're a 45-year-old printmaking and increasingly sculpture-making atelier where artists come from around the world to work. And when we, sort of entice an artist to come here and work with us, I mean, often they feel really lucky to do that, so I'm not sure entice is exactly the word, but when we strike up that relationship, we're very concerned to help them do something that they couldn't do on their own and expand their practice. And so we started working with Eva to make prints, and we did quite a bit of that. She made at least half a dozen prints with us. And then we began using some of her printed material as a substance that she incorporates into these metal sculptures. And she started to find the metal on the USF campus, actually out behind the art department. Okay. She jokes that she has a junk pile out there that she absolutely loves.
Did she say mine?
When she was here for our opening reception for this exhibit, she actually joked to the student audience, in case you see one of your works in my sculptures, too bad, now it's mine.
Right, it's mine.
So she's,
finders keepers.
Exactly.
Right.
So she started to gather that metal together and make these structures out of them. Some of the structures look like people, some look like sort of boats and vessels, others are wall mounted. And what she would do is she would actually wrap some of her printed fabric around them. And then we helped her develop this kind of putty-like material, an epoxy resin that almost looks like a kind of skin or like taffy, and she drapes that also around these metal frames. And so we have some of these works. They're really, once you've seen her paintings and drawings, which are in the show, these sculptures sort of look like her paintings have come to life and begun to walk out of the frame. So we thought that juxtaposition really made sense, the three-dimensional representation of her style and aesthetic thinking.
Well, it's very attractive, as a matter of fact, I think. and very inventive too. The woman who calls hers orangery,
yeah.
orangey, it reminded me of the subway system maps you get in New York.
Yes.
Did it
I've
sound
heard that
silly?
from other visitors.
Oh, really?
It's not silly at all.
Oh, how interesting. What did she, I'm sure she didn't say it's an orange subway map, but what was her motive?
Well, one thing that's distinctive about Donna's paintings, including the painting that you're talking about, is that they're two-sided. Right?
Yes.
They're on metal stands. They're not hung on the wall. They're on metal stands,
Right.
and then you walk around them in space, and you sort of appreciate how the front interrelates to the back, because a lot of what's happening is that she paints so vigorously. Donna's not like a timid, polite brush user. She paints by like dumping buckets of color onto the canvas, and even she's told me she will sometimes then use a garden hose to wash off that color for like the next layer. I mean, she's very aggressive with her canvases. They're pierced, sometimes they're sewn into, and they have all this gel-soaked cheesecloth built up on the surface so that they have a dimensional quality. Well, part of all of that working into the canvas produces the effect that you're talking about.
Right.
So like in orangey, this incredible color stain that's very rich emerges, and it's almost, how to describe, well, it's Manhattan shaped. That's what you're saying. It looks like the subway map.
It does.
It's kind of like an elongated bean in the center of the canvas. There are actually two of them.
That's the A train.
Yeah, the A train. Right. It's very evocative of that shape. And so remember how I said she has a word that she uses, figures, but it's an invented word that sounds like figures,
Yes.
and it really means this kind of idea of an abstract presence. That's what you're seeing in orangey. You're seeing these sort of presences that compel you as if they're figures, but they're totally abstract.
Very, very interesting. And where is she located now?
She's in Philadelphia.
At Tyler?
At Tyler.
Does she teach there?
She does.
Well, the women are doing well insofar as their careers are concerned.
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
You have a Yale professor, and
Oh, yes.
and there were quite a few people who were included in various large sort of Biennale shows.
Yeah, they're award winners, this group of women.
Two, I think, were in Whitney's.
The Whitney Biennale.
Yeah, and that's very important, is it not?
It is. So both Rochelle Feinstein and Donna Nelson were included in the Whitney Biennial just this past year. And so that's the sort of grandest American survey that's organized every 2 years at the Whitney. It's really a sort of touchstone exhibition that people flock to every 2 years. And Donna's paintings were included, and then a video by Rochelle was included.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
When you have a Whitney Biennial, are they sort of poised to sort of scour the East Coast, and with fewer people represented from the West Coast or even the South?
That's a criticism that is often put against the Whitney for this show, and I think they tend to be a little bit sort of like proactively defensive about that. So in this case, they actually had a curator who was from Chicago as part of a team of 3 curators who I'm told canvassed the country. And I did see a lot of artists from California, some sub-Midwesterners, and a lot of New Yorkers, but that's to be expected. I think it was reasonably diverse. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know, because I really did note that for a great many times that these names were all too familiar and so forth. But did you consider when you graduated, let's say from Williams, that you would be immersed in graphic research?
I hoped that I would be immersed in art, and I moved to New York for a few years and worked toward that there. And then I decided to move, quite frankly, back home. Tampa is my original home. And I got a great opportunity to write art criticism, or whatever you want to call it, arts writing, arts journalism, for the weekly newspaper Creative Loafing. And I've done that for, I think now 8.5 years. And I certainly did not necessarily expect to become an art critic or an arts journalist. But I have to tell you, it is so much fun.
I bet.
interviewing people about their work, going to see exhibitions, as you love to do. I mean, you know what this process is like. It's addictive.
It is.
Yeah.
That's neat.
So that dragged me into it, and then you know, I was so lucky, and I'm continually so grateful to have found a professional home at the museum. This was a really interesting next chapter for me, and I absolutely love you know, curating and organizing exhibitions. So I'm as happy as a clam. Is it exactly what I thought I would be doing? Not necessarily, but in the best possible way.
I bet. And you also function at the Institute.
Yeah.
And I think that when Don Saff was head of this, I know he used to say, you could go down into Paris and say I'm from Graphic Studio, and everybody would know who is in the arts world there. He said, you can go downtown. Of course, at that point, downtown wasn't inhabited, of course, but in case you met anybody.
It's more lively now.
It is. It's a little bit more lively, thank God. And nobody would know what you're talking about.
Yes.
But I think that's going to change. That's going to change. Now, for anyone who would like to see this, and I do recommend it, I wanted to give the hours.
Oh, yes.
And through the weekdays, it's 10 to 5.
That's correct.
And on Saturday, it's 1 to 4.
That's right.
It's very, very interesting, and it is one of the few exhibits I can remember, which is by women.
Yes.
Completely by women.
Yes, and let me say that was all Margaret Miller's doing.
Right.
So I co-curated the show with her, and I have to say it was very generous on her part to offer that experience to me.
Right.
She really initiated this exhibition in terms of the concept for it and knowing some of the artists associated with it right off the bat.
Right.
And you know, it was her vision, and in this case, I was really her supporter in this endeavor.
Well, you certainly supported very well. This is open through December 12th, and if we have any more like this, I'll be happy to have you back. I think it would be great. And thank you for watching, and plan to join us again.